My name is Nancy, I'm 28 years old, and I just finished an 18-hour shift at Memorial Hospital. My scrubs still had bloodstains from the multi-car pileup victims I helped save. All I wanted was my bed, but when I put my key in the lock, it wouldn't turn. That's when my stepmother, Karen, opened the door with a smile that made my stomach drop. Dad married her 5 years ago after Mom died, but I never expected what happened next. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button, and tell me if you've ever been locked out when you needed rest the most. I became a nurse because I wanted to help people. Growing up, I watched my mom battle cancer for years. The nurses who cared for her showed such compassion that I knew this was my calling. After nursing school and mountains of student debt, I specialized in emergency medicine. The adrenaline of the emergency room suited me. Quick decisions under pressure lives literally in my hands. 6 months ago, I was promoted to charge nurse, which came with more responsibility, more stress, and thankfully a bit more money. My relationship with my father, Thomas, used to be rock solid. After Mom died from her long battle with cancer 7 years ago, we leaned on each other. He was my rock and I was his anchor. That changed when he met Karen at a business convention 5 years ago. She was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in his manufacturing business. Within 6 months, they were married in a lavish ceremony that Mom would have hated. Karen was pleasant enough at first. She redecorated our family home, erasing most traces of my mother, but I bit my tongue. Dad seemed happy, and that's what mattered. Then came Brooke, Karen's 25-year-old daughter from a previous marriage. Brooke moved in about 4 months after the wedding, supposedly just until she found her own place. 3 years later, she was still there occupying our guest room that Karen had completely renovated for her, with a private bathroom and custom closet. Over time, I watched Karen change as Dad's business grew more successful. What started as occasional shopping sprees became weekly hauls of designer clothes. The modest family sedan was traded for a luxury SUV that only she drove. Brooke never worked, not even part-time. Her days consisted of spa appointments, shopping trips with Karen, and complaining about how bored she was. Despite having my own apartment for a while after nursing school, I moved back home 2 years ago when Dad had his heart attack. I wanted to monitor his recovery and help around the house. Karen seemed relieved to have a nurse in the family then. What started as a temporary arrangement became permanent when Karen suggested I stay to help with the mortgage. And help I did, contributing $1,200 monthly toward household expenses, which I later discovered was nearly the entire mortgage payment. Our family home meant everything to me. It sat on a quiet street lined with maple trees that turned brilliant red every fall. Mom had planted a garden in the backyard that I still maintained, growing her favorite roses and the herbs she used to cook with. My bedroom was unchanged from my childhood. Pale blue walls, bookshelves filled with medical textbooks now, instead of young adult novels and photos of Mom everywhere. It was my sanctuary after grueling hospital shifts. Tensions had been building over the past few months. Karen questioned why I wasn't contributing more financially now that you're a big, important charge nurse. She complained about my hours, saying the sound of me coming home disturbed their sleep. Brooke began using my bathroom when hers was not working right and would leave it a mess. Small things went missing from my room, jewelry from Mom books, even my special lavender lotion that helped me sleep. Yesterday had been absolute chaos at the hospital. A 5-car pileup on the interstate brought in 11 trauma patients simultaneously. With 2 doctors out sick, we were severely understaffed. I was supposed to end my shift at 10 in the evening, but as charge nurse, I couldn't leave my team drowning. Hours blurred together as we stabilized patients, performed emergency procedures, and comforted terrified family members. I saved a 6-year-old boy by recognizing the symptoms of internal bleeding that others missed. I held an elderly woman's hand as she took her last breath, her family stuck in traffic and unable to reach her in time. I administered 37 medications, inserted 6 IVs, and performed CPR twice. By the time things stabilized, I had been on my feet for 18 hours straight. As I drove home in the early morning light, my eyes burned with exhaustion. All I could think about was my bed and getting at least 6 hours of sleep before my next shift. I never expected to find myself locked out of my own home, but looking back now, I should have seen it coming. Just last week, I overheard Karen telling Brooke we need to figure out what to do about Nancy. This arrangement isn't working anymore. I assumed she meant the bathroom sharing situation, not that she was plotting to make me homeless. The morning sun was harsh on my tired eyes as I parked in our driveway. My scrubs felt like sandpaper against my skin after wearing them for so long. The blue fabric was stained with various fluids, evidence of the night's battles won and lost. My hair was still trapped in a tight ponytail, giving me a headache that pounded in rhythm with my heartbeat. My hands shook slightly from the combination of caffeine overconsumption and pure exhaustion. I dragged myself from the car, my nursing bag heavy on my shoulder. The weight of responsibility finally lifting as I approached the white two-story colonial I'd called home my entire life. The porch swing where Mom used to read to me creaked in the light breeze. The familiar sound usually welcomed me home, but today it felt like a warning I was too tired to heed. The brass key slid into the lock, just as it had thousands of times before, but something was wrong. It wouldn't turn. I tried again, jiggling it gently the way you do with a sticky lock. Nothing. I pulled it out, checked to make sure I had the right key, then tried again with more force. The key went in, but it was like trying to turn a key in wet cement. Confusion clouded my already foggy brain. Had Dad changed the locks for security reasons? Why wouldn't he have told me or given me a new key? I leaned my forehead against the cool door for a moment, gathering my remaining energy before knocking. 3 sharp raps, then silence. I heard movement inside, the click of heels on hardwood approaching steadily. When the door swung open, Karen stood there in a silk robe that probably cost more than 2 weeks of my salary. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled despite the early hour makeup flawlessly applied. She looked like she'd been awake for hours, waiting for this moment. "Karen, my key doesn't work," I said, too exhausted for pleasantries. "Did Dad change the locks?" The smile that spread across her face sent ice through my veins. It wasn't the smile of a person about to apologize for an inconvenience. It was the smile of someone who had set a trap and watched their prey walk right into it. "Yes, Nancy, we did change the locks," she said, leaning against the doorframe and blocking my view into the house. "Thomas and I decided it was time for some changes around here." "Changes? What are you talking about? I live here. I pay toward the mortgage." My voice sounded distant to my own ears, the exhaustion making everything seem surreal. Karen examined her manicured nails casually. "About that. We've decided that your contributions aren't quite sufficient anymore. Property values have increased, and quite frankly, Brooke and I need more space." I stared at her, wondering if this was some bizarre hallucination brought on by sleep deprivation. "Karen, I just worked 18 hours straight. I've saved 3 lives in the past 12 hours. I need to sleep. Can we talk about this later?" "Actually, no." Her voice hardened. "This has been coming for a while, Nancy. You're 28 years old. It's time you found your own place." "My own place," I repeated dumbly. "This is my place. I grew up here. My mother's garden is here." "Not anymore," Karen said with a smirk. "The house belongs to Thomas and me now, and we've decided that if you want to continue living here, you'll need to make a more substantial contribution." "What are you talking about? How substantial?" The pounding in my head intensified. $36,000, she said, as casually as if she were telling me the time. "Consider it back rent and future security." The number hit me like a physical blow. $36,000. That's insane. Where would I even get that kind of money? "That's not my problem," Karen shrugged. "Brooke needs a proper European vacation to distress. Paris, Milan, London. The poor girl has been so cooped up here." I glanced past Karen to see Brooke lounging on the living room sofa, scrolling through her phone. She looked up briefly and gave me a smug little wave before returning to her screen. Distress from what she doesn't work, she doesn't do anything. The unfairness of it all temporarily cut through my exhaustion. "Don't be rude," Karen snapped. "Not everyone needs to work themselves to death in some hospital. Some people contribute to the family in other ways." "Like what? What exactly does Brooke contribute?" The words came out sharper than I intended. Karen's eyes narrowed. "That's not your concern. What is your concern is finding $36,000, or finding a new place to live. Your father agrees with me on this, by the way." "Where is Dad? I want to talk to him." I tried to look past her into the house again. "He's on a business trip. Very convenient timing, I must say." Her smile returned more predatory than before. "He won't be back for a week. By then, I expect this to be resolved one way or another. The calculated nature of their plan hit me. They had waited until Dad was away, and I was at my most vulnerable after a long shift. I felt sick. "Let me get some of my things at least," I said, my voice sounding hollow. "When we see the money, you can have your things." Karen's hand rested on the door, ready to close it. "Your precious mother's jewelry, your clothes, your books, all waiting for you. $36,000. That's the price." Something cold and calm settled over me then. A clarity that cut through the exhaustion and disbelief. I straightened my shoulders and looked Karen directly in the eyes. "Understood," I said quietly, then turned and walked back to my car. "That's it," Karen called after me, sounding almost disappointed at my lack of hysterics. No begging, no crying. I didn't respond or look back. I heard the door slam behind me as I reached my car. Through the window, I could see Karen's triumphant expression as she watched me from behind the curtain. She thought she had won. She had no idea what was coming. The reality of my situation hit me as I sat in my car staring at the house I could no longer enter. My childhood home, the place where Mom took her last breath, the garden where her ashes were partially scattered, all of it now barricaded behind new locks and Karen's smug smile. The unfairness of it crashed over me in waves, each one threatening to drown me in despair. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel, too exhausted to even cry. My body ached from the marathon shift, my mind fuzzy from lack of sleep. I had saved lives last night, while Karen and Brooke had apparently been plotting to render me homeless. The contrast was so stark it felt almost comical in a horrifying way. Where would I go? My first thought was a hotel, but a quick check of my bank account through my phone revealed the harsh reality of a nurse's salary stretched thin by student loans and family contributions. After taxes, my take-home pay wasn't nearly as impressive as Karen seemed to think, especially not in our city where the cost of living climbed higher every year. With trembling fingers, I called Alicia, my best friend since nursing school. She answered on the second ring, her voice groggy with sleep. "Nancy, everything okay? It's not like you to call this early." The sound of her concerned voice broke something inside me. "They locked me out, Alicia," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I worked 18 hours saving people's lives, and I came home to new locks and a demand for $36,000. "What, who, your dad?" Alicia's voice sharpened sleep forgotten. "Karen. And Brooke. They changed the locks while Dad's on a business trip. They're holding my belongings hostage until I pay them $36,000 so Brooke can go on a European vacation." There was a moment of stunned silence before Alicia responded with a string of colorful expletives that would have made our nursing professors blush. "Where are you now?" "In my car, in the driveway." "I don't know where to go, Alicia. I'm so tired I can barely think." "You come here right now," she said firmly. "My couch is yours for as long as you need it. I'll put coffee on. Take it slow, driving over okay, you're exhausted." The drive to Alicia's apartment took 20 minutes that I barely remember. The world had taken on a dreamlike quality, buildings and traffic lights blurring together as I navigated on autopilot. When I arrived, Alicia was waiting in the parking lot of her apartment complex, still in her pajamas, concern etched across her face. As soon as I stepped out of the car, she wrapped me in a hug that finally broke the dam holding back my tears. I sobbed against her shoulder, the exhaustion and betrayal pouring out of me in waves. She held me until I could breathe again, then guided me up to her second-floor apartment. Inside, the scent of fresh coffee and the familiar surroundings of Alicia's cozy one-bedroom provided the first sense of safety I'd felt since arriving at my own house. I collapsed onto her couch, accepting the mug she pressed into my hands. "Tell me everything," she said, sitting beside me. I recounted the entire confrontation with Karen, the smugness in her expression, the casualness with which she demanded such an outrageous sum, and Brooke waving at me from the sofa. Alicia, who worked as a paralegal when she wasn't picking up nursing shifts, listened with growing outrage. "This is illegal on so many levels," she said when I finished. "You've been living there, contributing to the household. They can't just change the locks and keep your belongings. That's illegal eviction and theft." "Karen said the house belongs to her and Dad now," I said, the coffee barely making a dent in my exhaustion. Alicia's expression darkened. "Did your dad put the house solely in their names? What about your mom's will? Didn't she leave her share of the house to you?" The question hit me like a bucket of ice water. Mom had owned the house jointly with Dad. When she died, her will had specified that her share would pass to me. At least that's what I remembered from those awful days after her funeral. But in my grief, and with Dad's assurances that nothing would change, I had never followed up on the legal details. I don't know what happened with that, I admitted. Dad handled all the paperwork after Mom died. I trusted him. Alicia squeezed my hand. First thing tomorrow, we'll look into this. I know people at the county records office who can help, but right now you need sleep more than anything. She brought me blankets and a pillow, helping transform her couch into a temporary bed. As soon as my head hit the pillow, the weight of the day crashed over me. But sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Karen's face, heard her cruel demand, and felt the loss of my home all over again. When I did finally drift off, nightmares plagued me. Dreams of running through my childhood home while rooms disappeared behind me, of Mom's garden, withering and dying as I watched helplessly of Dad turning away from me while Karen laughed. I woke up hours later, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. The clock on Alicia's wall showed it was almost 2 in the afternoon. I had slept barely 6 hours, but my body refused to rest any longer with so much at stake. My head throbbed, my mouth was dry, and my muscles ached from tension. Alicia had left a note on the coffee table. Had to run to the office. Help yourself to food. Back by 5. We'll figure this out. Rest. But rest wasn't what I needed anymore. As I stood under the hot spray of Alicia's shower, letting it wash away the hospital grime, and tears, a new determination took hold. I had spent years taking care of others, patient's dad after his heart attack, even contributing to a household where I was clearly unwanted. All while Karen and Brooke took and took without giving anything back. I thought of the 6-year-old boy from yesterday's shift, how he had looked up at me with complete trust as I promised him I would make him better. I had kept that promise because that's what I did. I worked hard, I honored my commitments, I helped people. And I would not allow someone who had never worked a day in her life to take my home and my mother's memory from me. By the time Alicia returned home, I was dressed in borrowed clothes, my hair pulled back and my mind clear. She took one look at my face and nodded. There she is, she said with approval. Ready to fight back. More than ready, I replied. Karen picked the wrong nurse to mess with. The next morning, Alicia and I arrived at the county records office when it opened at 8. I had called in sick to the hospital for my shift, something I rarely did, but this couldn't wait. Alicia had taken the day off from the law firm where she worked, determined to help me uncover the truth about my home's ownership. My friend Maria works in property records, Alicia explained as we walked through the imposing government building. She can help us navigate the system faster. Maria turned out to be a petite woman with bright red hair and an even brighter smile. When Alicia explained my situation, her expression hardened with professional indignation. That's straight up illegal, she said, leading us to her computer. Let's see what's really going on with your property. As Maria's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up documents and records, I held my breath. The truth about my home's legal status would determine everything about how I proceeded. Here we go, Maria said after several minutes. The property at 247 Maple Avenue was originally purchased by Thomas and Eleanor Williams in 1992. Upon Eleanor's death in 2018, her will specified that her 50% ownership would transfer to her daughter, Nancy Eleanor Williams. My heart leaped at the confirmation that Mom had indeed left her share to me. So I do own half the house. Maria kept scrolling, her frown deepening. There's another document filed 8 months later. A quitclaim deed transferring your interest to Thomas Williams and Karen Blackwell Williams. What I leaned forward, staring at the screen. I never signed anything like that. Maria pointed to a signature at the bottom of the digital document. Is this your signature? I examined it closely, anger building, as I recognized the forgery. The signature looked similar to mine at first glance, but several details were wrong. The N was too rounded. The Y didn't have my characteristic loop. That is not my signature, I said firmly. I never signed any document transferring my ownership of the house. Alicia was already taking photos of the screen with her phone. This is document fraud. Forging your signature on a property transfer is a felony. Maria looked troubled. There's more. The house was remortgaged 6 months ago for a substantial amount. The equity was essentially drained from the property. The implications hit me hard. Not only had Karen and my father fraudulently transferred my ownership, but they had also taken out a new mortgage against the house's value. No wonder Karen was suddenly demanding money. They needed cash to make the higher payments. Armed with copies of all the relevant documents, Alicia and I left the records office and headed straight to her law firm. Her boss, Jackson Rivera, was a real estate attorney who agreed to see us immediately as a favor to Alicia. Jackson, a distinguished man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes, listened carefully as I explained the entire situation. He examined the documents from the records office, paying special attention to the forged quitclaim deed. "This is serious," he said when I finished. "Signature forgery on a property document is a criminal offense. Based on what I'm seeing, you still legally own half of that house regardless of what this fraudulent document says. They cannot legally lock you out or hold your possessions hostage." Hope surged through me. "So what do we do?" "First, we send a formal letter asserting your legal rights and demanding immediate access to your property and possessions," Jackson explained. "We'll include copies of your mother's will and highlight the forgery issue. We'll also note that you've been contributing to the mortgage payments, which further establishes your residency rights." Alicia squeezed my hand supportively. "Should we mention the potential criminal charges?" Jackson nodded gravely. "Absolutely. They need to understand the seriousness of what they've done. Document fraud, illegal eviction, theft of personal property, these are criminal matters, not just civil disputes." While Jackson began drafting the legal letter, Alicia and I drove to my storage unit across town. After Mom died, I had preserved many of her important papers and belongings there, unable to bear having them in the house where Karen could dispose of them. The small unit was packed with labeled boxes. It took us nearly an hour of searching before I found what I needed: a folder containing Mom's original will, funeral arrangements, and important family documents. Among them was a handwritten letter Mom had left, specifically for me to be opened after her death. I had read it many times in those first painful months, but one passage now stood out with new significance. "The house that has been our home for so many years belongs equally to your father and me. My half now passes to you, my darling daughter. Your father knows this is my wish. The home should always remain a place of comfort for you, a sanctuary where you can feel my love even when I'm gone. This is my final gift to you, a place that will always be partly yours, no matter what changes life brings." Tears blurred my vision as I showed the letter to Alicia. Mom had been so explicit about her intentions. She had wanted to ensure I would always have a home, and Dad had betrayed that wish by allowing Karen to manipulate him. Back at Alicia's apartment, we found more evidence to strengthen our case. I had meticulously kept records of all my contributions to the household: mortgage payments, utility bills, even grocery receipts. These financial records established a clear pattern of my residence and contributions to the home. I also discovered an old phone I had stopped using several months ago but had never deleted the content from. On it were text messages from Brooke accidentally sent to me instead of her friend with the same first name. The texts were damning. "Mom's finally convincing Thomas to get rid of Nancy. She says once we have the house to ourselves, we can renovate her room into my dream closet. Can't wait." And another, "We're changing the locks when Nancy's working a long shift. Mom says she'll never be able to come up with the money we're asking for. Finally getting that nurse out of our hair." The calculated cruelty of their plan made my blood boil. While I was saving lives, they were plotting to make me homeless. The exhaustion and shock I had felt yesterday transformed into righteous anger and determination. Jackson called that evening with the completed legal letter. It was comprehensive and forceful, outlining my legal rights to the property, the evidence of fraud, and the potential criminal consequences if Karen and my father did not immediately restore my access to the home and my possessions. "This should get their attention," Jackson said. "We're not just suggesting they've done something wrong, we're proving it with documentation." We arranged to have the letter delivered first thing the next morning. Karen would find it at her door around 7 a.m., typically when she took in the morning paper in her silk robe and slippers. I would be parked down the street watching from a distance, ready to call the police if needed. That night, I slept better despite the circumstances. There's a unique peace that comes with fighting back against injustice, with standing up for yourself, instead of allowing others to dictate your fate. Mom would have been proud. She had always taught me to be kind, but never to let anyone take advantage of my kindness. Tomorrow, Karen would learn that this nurse wasn't someone she could push around. I had faced down death in the emergency room. I had held people's lives in my hands and helped them fight their way back from the brink. Karen's schemes were nothing compared to that. The morning dawned clear and crisp as I parked my car 3 houses down from my home. I had a perfect view of the front door while remaining inconspicuous. Alicia sat beside me, a thermos of coffee between us, moral support for whatever came next. "The courier should be here any minute," she said, checking her watch. "Jackson arranged for priority delivery at 7 sharp." Right on cue, a delivery van pulled up in front of the house. The courier, dressed in a neat uniform, approached the door with an official-looking envelope. He rang the bell twice, waiting patiently. After a moment, the door opened to reveal Karen in her usual morning attire, an expensive silk robe, hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. She seemed confused by the formal delivery but accepted the envelope with a practiced smile. The courier asked her to sign, then departed. Karen stood on the porch, examining the envelope with growing suspicion. Through my car window, I watched as she tore it open and began to read. The transformation of her expression was almost theatrical. The polite smile melted away, replaced by shock, then disbelief, then unmistakable fear. Her face drained of color as she flipped through the attached documents. Copies of the forged quitclaim deed, my mother's will, records of my mortgage contributions, and the texts from Brooke outlining their scheme. "She's getting to the part about criminal charges," Alicia murmured, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. Karen's hand flew to her mouth. She looked up from the papers, glancing around wildly, as if expecting police to emerge from the bushes. When she stepped back into the house, I thought that might be the end of the show. I was wrong. Less than 30 seconds later, the scream began. It started low, then rose in pitch and volume until it seemed to fill the entire neighborhood. It wasn't a scream of fear or pain, it was pure rage. The sound of someone whose carefully constructed plan was crumbling around them. Karen burst back onto the porch, letter clutched in her hand, still screaming incoherently. The noise was so disturbing that lights began coming on in neighboring houses. Curtains twitched as curious neighbors peered out to identify the source of the commotion. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had lived next door for 20 years and had been my mother's close friend, emerged from her house in a bathrobe, concern etched on her face. Several other neighbors appeared on their porches, staring in confusion at the spectacle of Karen's meltdown. "This is better than I expected," Alicia whispered, unable to hide her grin. I nodded, a strange calm settling over me as I watched Karen's public unraveling. "Let's get closer. I want to hear what she's saying." We exited the car and walked casually toward the house, just 2 concerned citizens investigating the neighborhood disturbance. As we approached, Karen's words became distinguishable among the screams. How dare she threaten me, that ungrateful little." The rest was lost in another wordless shriek as she waved the letter like a battle flag. Mrs. Rodriguez spotted me and hurried over, her eyes wide with concern. "Nancy, what on earth is happening? Is Karen okay?" "She's upset because I found out she forged my signature to steal my half of the house," I explained calmly. "The letter she's holding is from my lawyer, explaining that what she did is illegal and that she could face criminal charges." Mrs. Rodriguez's expression hardened. "I never trusted that woman. The way she talked about you when you weren't around. Telling everyone you were unstable, that you were taking advantage of your father's generosity. I knew she was lying." This was news to me. She said, "What about me?" "Oh, honey," Mrs. Rodriguez patted my arm. "She's been poisoning the well for months. Telling neighbors you were emotionally unstable from your mother's death, that you refused to get help, that you were taking financial advantage of your father. Nobody who knows you believed it, of course." The depth of Karen's manipulation was staggering. While I worked saving lives, she had been systematically undermining my reputation in preparation for this moment. By now, Karen had noticed our presence. Her eyes locked onto mine, her face contorting with fury. "You!" she shrieked, pointing at me with a trembling finger. "You think you're so clever with your lawyer letters and your threats." I remained calm, aware of the growing audience of neighbors. "I'm just asserting my legal rights, Karen. That's my home too. My mother left her half to me, not you. You have no proof of that, she spat. Actually, I do. It's all in that letter you're holding, along with proof that you forged my signature on the quitclaim deed. That's fraud, Karen. Criminal fraud. Her face paled further. Thomas signed those papers. It was his idea. I doubted that very much, but her attempt to throw Dad under the bus was telling. Then he'll have to answer for that too, I replied evenly. Karen's screaming had attracted more than just neighbors. A police cruiser pulled up to the curb, two officers stepping out with the weary expressions of people who had seen too many domestic disputes. What's going on here? The older officer asked, looking between Karen and me. Before I could answer, Karen launched into a frenzied explanation about ungrateful stepdaughters and false accusations. The officer held up a hand to stop her rambling. Ma'am, I need you to calm down. You're disturbing the entire neighborhood. Alicia stepped forward, her paralegal experience evident in her professional demeanor. Officers, my friend Nancy Williams owns half of this property through inheritance from her mother. Her stepmother and father illegally changed the locks to prevent her access and are holding her possessions hostage. We have just served them with a legal letter outlining these facts and the potential criminal charges involved. The younger officer turned to me. Is this true? You own part of this house? Yes, sir. My mother left her half to me when she died. I have a copy of her will right here. I pulled the document from my bag, along with copies of the other evidence. The officers reviewed the paperwork while Karen continued to fume, though her screams had subsided to angry muttering. Mrs. Rodriguez and several other neighbors vouched for me, confirming that I had indeed lived in the house my entire life, and that the lock changing had occurred just yesterday. Ma'am, the older officer finally addressed Karen. Based on what we're seeing, you can't legally prevent Miss Williams from entering her property. If she co-owns this house, changing the locks without her knowledge or consent could constitute an illegal eviction. She doesn't own anything, Karen insisted. My husband can explain his side when he returns, the officer interrupted. For now, Miss Williams needs to have access to her home and possessions. I suggest you provide her with a new key immediately, or we can call a locksmith to let her in, which would be at your expense. Karen's phone had been buzzing incessantly throughout this confrontation. She glanced at it now, her expression shifting from rage to panic. It's Thomas, she said, her voice suddenly small. Apparently, news of the neighborhood disturbance had reached my father despite his business trip. Karen answered the call and immediately launched into her version of events, painting herself as the victim of my unreasonable demands. Even from several feet away, I could hear my father's voice rising on the other end of the line. Karen's face crumpled as whatever he was saying clearly wasn't the support she had expected. But Thomas, she's threatening us with criminal charges, she protested. She has a lawyer. No, I didn't know about Eleanor's will. What document? I never. That's not what you said when. Her voice trailed off as she listened, her free hand clutching at her robe. When she finally lowered the phone, her composure had completely collapsed. Without another word, she disappeared into the house, returning moments later with a key which she thrust at the police officer rather than handing it directly to me. Thomas is coming home today, she said flatly. He says you can have access until this is sorted out legally. The defeat in her voice was evident, though. I suspected the battle was far from over. The officer handed me the key with a sympathetic smile. Do you want us to accompany you inside to collect some of your things? I nodded gratefully. Yes, please. I'm not sure what condition my belongings are in. As we approached the front door, Brooke appeared in the doorway, clearly having witnessed the entire scene from inside. Her usual smugness was replaced by uncertainty and a hint of fear. What's happening? She demanded. Why are the police here? Your European vacation just got canceled, I informed her calmly as I stepped past her into my childhood home, the officers following behind me. The house felt different somehow. Hostile territory, rather than the sanctuary it had once been. But with each step inside, I reclaimed a piece of what Karen had tried to take from me. My home, my mother's legacy, and my dignity. 3 days later, I sat in Jackson Rivera's office, hands folded in my lap, waiting for my father to arrive. After the public confrontation with Karen, things had moved quickly. Dad had cut his business trip short, returning home that same evening to find his wife and stepdaughter in complete disarray, and me staying with Alicia, refusing to return to the house until we had a legal resolution. Dad had called repeatedly, his messages shifting from confusion to apology to pleading. I had maintained my boundary, insisting that we meet only with lawyers present. Today would be that meeting. "Are you ready for this?" Jackson asked, arranging documents on the conference table. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, smoothing my navy blue blazer. I had chosen my outfit carefully, professional, confident, the appearance of someone who couldn't be intimidated or manipulated. At precisely 2 o'clock, the receptionist announced the arrival of Thomas Williams, Karen Williams, and their attorney, a sharp-looking woman named Diane Foster, whom I recognized as one of the most expensive lawyers in the city. Interesting that they could afford her services while claiming financial hardship. Dad entered first, looking older and more haggard than I had ever seen him. The confident businessman was gone, replaced by a man who seemed uncertain and diminished. When his eyes met mine, I saw genuine regret there, but I maintained my composure. Karen followed her usual perfect appearance, slightly frayed at the edges. Her designer outfit couldn't hide the tension in her shoulders or the tightness around her eyes. She avoided looking at me directly. Once everyone was seated, Jackson took control of the meeting with calm authority. "We're here to resolve the illegal actions taken against my client Nancy Williams, and to establish a clear legal framework for the property at 247 Maple Avenue." Diane Foster leaned forward. "My clients dispute the characterization of their actions as illegal. There was merely a misunderstanding about property rights." "A misunderstanding?" Jackson raised an eyebrow. "I have here a quitclaim deed with a forged signature. I have documentation of an illegal eviction. I have text messages outlining a premeditated plan to remove Miss Silges Williams from her legal residence. These aren't misunderstandings, counselor. They're crimes." Dad winced visibly at the word crimes. Karen's face remained impassive, though her knuckles whitened as she gripped her purse. "Thomas was under the impression that all paperwork regarding the property was legitimate," Diane countered. I couldn't stay silent any longer. "Dad, did you know Mom left her half of the house to me?" All eyes turned to my father, who seemed to shrink under the direct question. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. "Yes, I knew." Karen's head whipped toward him, shock evident on her face. "Thomas." "I'm not lying anymore, Karen," he said wearily. "Not to Nancy, not to these lawyers, not to myself." He turned to me, his eyes pleading. "Your mother wanted you to always have a home. I betrayed that when I let Karen convince me to transfer the property." "Did you forge my signature?" I asked, my voice steady despite the emotion building in my throat. Dad shook his head. "No, I was told you had signed it. I never saw the actual document." All eyes turned to Karen, whose composure finally cracked. "Fine, yes, I signed the paper." But Thomas knew what was happening. He agreed we needed full control of the house for our retirement planning. Jackson slid a document across the table. "This is a formal statement acknowledging the forgery. Miss Williams has the right to pursue criminal charges, but she's willing to forego that option if we can reach an equitable resolution today." The meeting continued for nearly 2 hours, hashing out details and concessions. Throughout it all, I maintained my calm, letting Jackson handle the negotiations while I observed my father's defeated posture and Karen's increasing desperation. Just as we were finalizing the terms, the office door burst open, and Brooke stormed in, her face flushed with anger. "Mom, the credit card was declined when I tried to put the deposit on the Paris apartment. What's happening?" Karen closed her eyes, briefly, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "Not now, Brooke." "Yes, now," Brooke insisted, either not noticing or not caring about the formal meeting she was interrupting. "You promised me this trip. You said once Nancy was gone, we'd have plenty of money." Jackson and I exchanged glances. Her outburst was revealing far more than Karen would have wanted. Miss Blackwell, Jackson addressed Brooke formally. "This is a private legal meeting. I must ask you to wait outside. I'm not going anywhere until someone explains why my vacation is being canceled." Brooke's voice rose to a familiar whine that I had endured for years. Dad finally spoke up, authority returning to his voice. "Brooke, that's enough. There will be no European vacation. The financial situation has changed. Please wait in the reception area." Brooke stared at him in shock. It was perhaps the first time he had ever denied her anything. With a final glare at me, she flounced out of the room, slamming the door behind her. After that interruption, the remaining negotiations proceeded quickly. By the end of the meeting, we had a legally binding agreement. The forged quitclaim deed would be nullified, restoring my 50% ownership of the house. The new mortgage Karen and Dad had taken out would be their sole responsibility. Most importantly, they would be moving out within 30 days, and I would retain ownership of the property. "You're choosing the house over us?" Dad asked as the lawyers finalized the paperwork. "I'm choosing to honor Mom's wishes," I replied quietly. "And I'm choosing to stand up for myself against people who were willing to make me homeless after an 18-hour shift saving lives." Dad had the grace to look ashamed. "I never wanted that. Karen said we would give you plenty of notice, help you find a new place. I never knew about changing the locks while you were working." I wasn't sure I believed him, but it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that he had a choice to make now. "What will you do?" I asked. "After you move out?" Dad glanced at Karen, who was studiously avoiding everyone's gaze. "We have some decisions to make. About our marriage. About our future." The implication was clear. This incident had revealed aspects of Karen that even Dad couldn't ignore. Whether their marriage would survive remained to be seen. As we all stood to leave, Dad approached me hesitantly. "Nancy, I know I've broken your trust. I know I've failed you and failed your mother's memory. But you're my daughter, and I love you. I hope someday you'll give me the chance to rebuild our relationship." For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt tears threatening. Despite everything, he was still my dad. The man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had held me through nights of teenage heartbreak, who had been so proud when I graduated nursing school. "I'd like that," I said simply, "but it will take time, and things will never be the same." He nodded, understanding the boundary I was setting. "I understand. Thank you for not pressing charges. We don't deserve your mercy." As he turned to leave with Karen, I called after him, "Dad." He looked back, hope flickering in his tired eyes. "Mom would want me to forgive you eventually, and I will. But she'd also want me to be smart about it." A sad smile crossed his face. "She always was the wiser of us two. She'd be proud of how you've handled this." As I watched them leave, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: sadness for what had been lost, pride in how I had stood up for myself, and a cautious hope for a healthier future relationship with my father. Karen and Brooke were another story entirely. Some relationships weren't worth salvaging. Jackson shook my hand firmly. "Congratulations, Nancy. The house is yours now, free and clear of their influence." "Thank you for everything," I said sincerely. "I couldn't have done this without your help." As I left the office, the weight that had pressed on me since finding my key wouldn't work in the lock began to lift. I had reclaimed not just my property but my power. No one would ever again make me feel homeless in my own life. The first thing I did after getting full legal possession of my childhood home was change all the locks. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. I was securing my boundaries in the most literal way possible. The locksmith, an older gentleman named Walter, worked efficiently while sharing stories about his 40 years in the business. "You'd be amazed how many family disputes I see," he told me as he installed the final deadbolt. "Property brings out the worst in some folks. And the best in others," I added, thinking of Alicia's unhesitating support and Jackson's determined advocacy. After Walter left, I stood in the empty foyer, truly alone in my house for the first time. Karen, Brooke, and Dad had moved out a week earlier, taking only their personal belongings and the furniture they had purchased. What remained was an odd mix of my childhood home and empty spaces where Karen's influence had been. The first weekend, I invited Alicia over, and we went room by room, removing any trace of Karen's decorating choices. The gaudy crystal chandelier in the dining room came down, replaced with my mother's simple but elegant fixture that I found carefully wrapped in the attic. The cold, formal living room furniture was donated, making space for comfortable, welcoming pieces I selected with care. The master bedroom, which Karen and Dad had occupied, was the hardest to transform. I stood in the doorway for nearly an hour before I could even enter it. This had been my parents' room where Mom had spent her final days. Karen had stripped it of all warmth, turning it into a showcase of expensive taste rather than a lived-in space. I didn't want to sleep there, not yet. Instead, I reclaimed my childhood bedroom, repainting the walls a soothing sage green that reminded me of Mom's garden. My medical books returned to their shelves, my photos found their places on the walls, and gradually the house began to feel like home again. Mom's garden had suffered the most under Karen's reign. Many of the perennials had been removed to make way for showy but high-maintenance flowers that had been neglected. I spent every free moment outside my hands in the soil replanting the herbs and flowers Mom had loved. Mrs. Rodriguez often joined me, sharing cuttings from her own garden and stories about Mom I had never heard. Eleanor always said this garden was her therapy, Mrs. Rodriguez told me one afternoon as we planted lavender. She said when things got hard during her illness, she'd come out here and be reminded that life finds a way to bloom, even in difficult conditions. The wisdom of that struck me deeply. Like Mom's garden, I too was finding my way back to life after a period of hardship. At the hospital, I returned with renewed energy and focus. My supervisor, Dr. Palmer, noticed the change immediately. "Whatever you've been dealing with, it seems to have made you stronger," he commented, after watching me efficiently manage a complex trauma case. "It has," I agreed. "Sometimes you have to fight for what's yours." 2 months after the legal settlement, Dr. Palmer called me into his office. I entered cautiously, wondering if there was a problem with one of my patients. "Nancy, I've been watching your work these past few months," he began, his expression serious. "Your clinical skills have always been excellent, but recently I've noticed your leadership abilities have really shone through." I waited, uncertain where this was heading. "We're creating a new position, Assistant Director of Emergency Nursing. More responsibility, more administrative work, but also more influence over protocols and training. And of course, better compensation. I'd like to recommend you for it." The offer took me by breath away. It was a significant promotion, one that typically went to nurses with many more years of experience. "Why me?" I asked honestly. Dr. Palmer smiled. "Because you've demonstrated not just clinical excellence, but resilience and integrity under pressure. Those qualities are rare and valuable. Think about it and let me know by next week." I accepted the position the next day. The salary increase was substantial, easing the financial strain of maintaining the house on my own. More importantly, the role gave me the opportunity to improve systems that directly affected patient care and staff well-being. With my financial situation stabilized, I made a decision about the empty rooms in my house. My colleague Zoe, another nurse who had been commuting 2 hours each way to the hospital, was struggling to find affordable housing nearby. I offered her the guest room at a fraction of what she would pay for an apartment. "Are you sure?" she asked when I made the offer. "After everything with your stepmother, I would understand if you wanted to live alone." "I'm sure," I told her. "The difference is choice and respect. This is my home, and I'm choosing to share it with someone who respects that." Having Zoe in the house brought new energy and friendship. We understood each other's crazy schedules and need for quiet recovery time after difficult shifts. She loved to cook, I enjoyed gardening, and between us, the house became a peaceful sanctuary for healing, both for ourselves and occasionally for colleagues who needed a break from the intensity of hospital work. Dad called regularly, though I maintained clear boundaries. We met for coffee every other Sunday, carefully rebuilding our relationship on new, more honest terms. He and Karen had separated their divorce proceedings, moving forward quietly. "I owe you an apology that can never be adequate," he said during one of our meetings. "I failed to protect what your mother wanted for you. I let Karen's influence override my better judgment." Why, I asked the question that had haunted me for months. Why would you risk your relationship with me for her? Dad stared into his coffee for a long moment before answering. "After your mother died, I was lost. Karen made me feel needed, important. She admired the business success that came after your mother's death, never knowing that it was your mother's life insurance that provided the capital for that expansion." He looked up, shame evident in his eyes. It was easier to believe Karen's flattery than to face my grief and guilt. By the time I realized how she was manipulating me, I felt trapped. It wasn't a justification, and he didn't offer it as one. It was simply the truth, a painful human truth about weakness and poor choices. Understanding it didn't erase the hurt, but it helped me see my father as a flawed human rather than a villain. 6 months after reclaiming my home, I started a support group for healthcare workers dealing with family estrangement and boundary issues. So many of my colleagues I discovered were struggling with family members who either didn't understand their commitment to their medical careers or who took advantage of their caring nature. The hardest thing for healers to learn, I told the group during our first meeting, is that we cannot heal everyone and that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for our own well-being and continued ability to care for others. The group grew quickly, becoming a valuable resource, not just for emotional support, but for practical advice on legal and financial protections. Jackson even volunteered his time once a month to answer legal questions. As the one-year anniversary of the lock-changing incident approached, I spent a quiet evening in Mom's garden, now restored to its former beauty. The roses were blooming their scent, carrying on the warm evening air. I sat on the stone bench Dad had installed for Mom's 50th birthday, feeling her presence more strongly than I had in years. "You were right, Mom," I said softly to the garden. "Sometimes the most important thing we can do is stand firm in our truth, even when it's painful." In the years since Karen had demanded $36,000 to let me into my own home, I had learned so much about strength boundaries and the difference between kindness and being taken advantage of. I had discovered that I could be both compassionate and firm, both forgiving and protective of what was rightfully mine. The nurse who had walked away from her home that exhausting morning was not the same woman who now sat confidently in her garden. Life's hardest challenges, I had learned, don't break us. They reveal our true strength if we're brave enough to claim it. As twilight deepened into night, I made a silent promise to myself, and to my mother's memory, I would continue to build a life of purpose and integrity, to use my home as she had intended, as a place of healing and growth. And I would never again allow anyone to make me feel that I didn't deserve the space I occupied in this world. Life doesn't always give us what we want or expect. Sometimes it locks doors we thought would always be open to us. But with courage, support, and persistence, we can find new keys. Not just to the doors others try to bar, but to versions of ourselves we never knew existed. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against family members who tried to take advantage of you? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they deserve to fight for their place in the world. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes walking away is just the first step toward coming back stronger than before.